everyone. Sorry. Thank you for your patience. We're having some, weather and everything else. We're a little late to get here, but we have everything figured out now. So thanks for everyone coming tonight. So we have a hybrid session tonight. So we have a bunch of folks online and we have people here in person. So for folks online, if you have questions, you can use the chat box, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I think we're planning on like a 30-minute talk or so, and then plenty of time to answer your questions because we know you all probably have some. So let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Cook. I'm the CSU Extension Director here in Gilpin County. So thanks for joining us tonight on this chilly spring evening. So we can talk about wolves. Let's see. So I want to do a quick kind of intro to set the stage for what we're gonna talk about tonight. So although there may or may not be a lone wolf or two in Gilpin County, we know for sure that the introduced wolves are not here yet. So the purpose of this workshop tonight is just to bring awareness and start thinking about if or when the wolves come, what are the things we need to think about. So just kind of by a show of hands and folks online, maybe you can put it in the chat. Who all is a livestock owner? Can you just raise your hand? Okay, cool. And then how about a pet owner? Okay, good. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, you know, things to think about with pets and definitely with livestock as well. Okay, let's see. So please remember that the Colorado voters voted on the introduction of wolves. And then it's the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department who are tasked with implementing this bill. And so we have Colorado Parks and Wildlife folks here tonight. I'll introduce them in a minute. So just remember that. And we know it's a hot topic. So whether you're for or against wolves, you all have valid reasons for and against. But tonight, let's set some ground rules. So number one, let's listen to each other and respect each other. And number two, let's commit to learning rather than debating. So can we all agree on those ground rules tonight? Yes. Awesome. Okay. So tonight, I guess I'll go ahead and just introduce you guys and you can jump and get started. So Veronica Jovovich, I hope I got your name right. Awesome. Okay, she's from Colorado State University. She's a human wildlife conflict specialist. And then Tim Woodward is our local Gilpin County, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. What's your title, manager?
Officer, Game Warden, District Wildlife Manager.
Okay, whatever you want to call him, he's our local guy. So if you have any wolf issues, Tim's going to be your contact. All right, so I guess let's just jump ahead and get started with Veronica.
Excellent, thank you. And again, thank you for your patience with the weather and traffic delays getting out here. So I'm coming tonight from CSU. I have a split position at CSU. So half of my position is CSU Extension, where I'm a human wildlife conflict specialist, and half is as traditional research faculty. So a good portion of my job is dedicated to serving, I mean, all of it is dedicated to serving Coloradans. But one is that campus-based traditional faculty, and the other is working with extension agents and working with the public to make sure that the resources that we've got on campus are being focused specifically to help folks get the right kind of information that all of you need to feel safe and happy and productive. So my role at CSU is a little bit different than a lot of other folks tend to think about these things. So it's helpful that Jennifer already asked the show of hands about livestock versus pet and to the general public. So I put together this talk for you folks with a pet owner mind to the content that I'm delivering. Normally, most of what I do is related to livestock carnivore conflict. But this is a little bit of a different focus because it sounded like that's the audience that was going to be in the room tonight. So with that in mind, I will advance my slides somehow. Here we go. I wanted to start off with this map here showing suitable wolf habitat. So as Jennifer said, wolves aren't here yet necessarily, Being in Gilpin County, I thought it would be helpful, you folks know where you are, but to situate yourselves in this map. So Gilpin County isn't in the best wolf habitat, but it is in habitat that wolves could utilize. And another thing to keep in mind is that, wolves don't have this map. They don't know exactly where the best habitat is. And so they could end up in not quite as good habitat while they're sorting themselves out. So, so that's where we are in sort of wolf habitat space. And with that, I wanted to point out a little bit about wolf biology and behavior and ecology with that pet safety mindset. So really, humans don't tend to have problems with wolves. Wolves tend to keep their distance from us. It is more pet and livestock that can have conflict with them. And some of the reason behind that is because wolves are territorial animals, right? They live in packs and they defend their territories against other wolves. And when you bring a dog into areas where there are wolves, they can see that dog as a threat, as a competitor. And so sometimes you can have negative interactions with the wolves because of that evolutionary history. So I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about how to differentiate wolves from coyotes so that if you're in places where there could be wolves, you can keep an eye out for signs so that you can keep your pets safe. And I found this really helpful video that shows the difference between coyotes and wolves really clearly, right? So these are coyotes, and this is a wolf in the same place. And so what you'll notice right away, right, is the size difference. The coloring's pretty similar, but the build is a bit different. And so you can see wolves are about twice as big as coyotes, right? They're a bit taller. They're a bit more substantial, right? Their bodies are a bit deeper. They're not as lanky as coyotes, and they're not as light on their feet. They're heavier, bigger animals. And so some of those physical characteristics that can help differentiate is wolves tend to have rounder, bigger ears, and coyotes tend to have smaller, pointy ears. Wolves tend to have a bigger, blunter muzzle, whereas coyotes have a sort of finer, more delicate features. And it's really difficult to tell scale in a natural system. So I work in Yellowstone every summer, and every summer when I go out there, I have to kind of recalibrate. And I'll see coyotes and I always think, is that a wolf? Is that not a wolf? I'm not sure. And then I see a wolf. And once you see them in that space, it's a little bit easier, but it's really easy to make a mistake between the two. There's a lot of overlap and it really is hard to tell scale in a natural system unless there's a man-made object nearby. So some other cues you can use are if you're out in the hiking with your pets, you can look for tracks. Wolf tracks are really large, and they're very similar in shape to coyote tracks and to domestic dog tracks. The size though is huge. Like they're much bigger than most domestic dogs, and certainly much bigger than coyotes. Wolves tend to travel in straight lines as they're moving. They tend to mean business when they're going places, and dogs tend to meander. Sometimes, if you see domestic dog tracks, you'll also see boot tracks that look about the same age because they're with a person. So apart from the size and the body, if you're actually seeing animals and tracks, you can also look for scats. And so thinking about this is all ways of looking for fresh clues about whether or not there are wolves in the area. So coyotes can be more omnivorous, and so you'll find more fruit seeds or vegetation or like stone fruit centers, grass in their scats. Their scats tend to be much smaller, but the overlap in size can be difficult to differentiate. But the content is really very different. And depending on how committed you are to figuring out what's around, you can get more personal with the scats or less, no judgment. Wolves tend to have more meat in their scats. So they'll have more hair, they'll have more fully digested flesh. When animals are feeding on a really fresh carcass, they have what we call blood scats. And so, and this is true whether it's a puma or a coyote or a wolf, they'll tend to be a bit more tarry. But wolves, you'll see more ungulate hair and large chunks of bones. Whereas domestic dog scats, you're probably all familiar with those. Those look like chewed up dog food, right? They're really homogeneous. There isn't generally hair in them or chunks of bones because that's not what they're eating. And one thing I'll point out with that too, if you find fresh carcasses, regardless of how that carcass got there, unless it's been hit by a car or is hunter killed, it's a good idea to give that carcass a wide berth because any kind of carnivore could be feeding on that and could cause problems for you or your pets. And so one thing that I do when I'm out hiking around is keep an eye out for scavengers that might be flushing off a fresh carcass and definitely give that a respectful distance in case there's a carnivore there that's feeding on it or feels the need to defend that carcass. Okay, so human safety is certainly on people's minds when they start thinking about wolves. And I would like to give you a little bit of context for the real or the perceived versus real risk that wolves pose to people. So in North America, we have about 80,000 wolves or so, give or take. And in the last 124 years, there have been 2 people killed by wolves. Neither of those people were killed in the lower 48 states. So one of those was in Canada and the other one was in Alaska. In Yellowstone National Park, where we have 1.4 million visitors annually and about 150 wolves, there have never been any attacks on people. And so it's just helpful to remember that they really do tend to avoid humans. They really do pose very little risk to humans. And, you know, thinking about Yellowstone, all of that is wolf country. All of those folks that are backpacking, hiking, picnicking, recreating, they're all doing it in wolf country and we've never had an attack. And for anybody who's read about any of the activities in Yellowstone, you know that people do some pretty boneheaded stuff there, trying to get close to animals and take pictures, you know, trip of a lifetime. And so if things were going to go wrong, that would be a prime place for that to happen. So that being said, it's helpful to know what to do in carnivore country, regardless of the level of threat they pose. And one thing you can do is when you're out hiking around or working or whatever it is, don't be stealthy, make noise. You know, if you're with people, have a conversation, leave your headphones at home so that you can hear what's going on around you and you can pick up on what's going on. But, you know, don't try and be quiet. You know, you don't have to do the hey bear thing as you're going. That level of noise isn't necessary, but especially if you feel a little uneasy, sing to yourself, whatever it is that, you know, let nature know that you're around and that you're a human. Another thing you should always do in carnivore country, whether that's got really good voice control, you can do that, you know, if they're not going to take off after they see something interesting. But most critters, most dogs, you should keep them on a leash if you're at all concerned about carnivores in the area. And you always want to keep pets in at night as much as you can. And that includes, you know, dogs, cats. If you have small scale livestock operations, the best thing that you can do is put them in a fully enclosed structure with a door that you close every night and a roof and no points of ingress, no points of entry, which is that one. And so wolves they don't have climbing feet and they aren't good at climbing. So a chain link fence is probably going to be fine for wolves, but for bears and pumas, they can make it right up and over that kind of thing. So
3 feet,
what's that?
3 feet to keep a wolf out.
That's a good question. I wouldn't 3 feet seems a little low.
I would
I
say
would-
at least 6.
Yeah, I would think like, a tall fence would do it. But yeah, 3 feet seems low. I think you said 6?
I thought that's
what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said, well, I may have said that in like, oh, they don't have climbing feet. Is that?
Oh, could be.
Yeah, so they don't, pumas can climb up nearly anything, but wolves don't have good, good feet for climbing up structures. You also want to keep an eye out for carnivore sign. Read the cues around you and have an idea of what's going on. If you're walking in on a fresh carcass, if you're starting to see fresh scat, really fresh tracks, anything like that, you can listen for howling, out in the evening. But you can read the landscape for what's going on to get an idea of how close an eye you need to keep on your pets. All right. In the exceedingly rare event that you have an interaction with a wolf, an interaction where it doesn't just run away, what you want to do is you want to face the wolf and you want to give it some respectful distance, right? So don't walk towards it. You can back away and give it some room. Most of the time, it's going to make its own way to safety and leave you alone. Wolves are social animals, and so they respond to social cues in ways that things like mountain lions don't, because they're solitary critters. And so you want to maintain eye contact and speak calmly to them, let them know that you're a person. And, that should let them know that they don't really want to mess with you. If you haven't already leashed your dog and you have an interaction with a wolf, that would be a great time to get a leash and get that dog fully under control. And if you're feeling unsafe, you can always retreat to safety, to a shelter. So your car, Forest Service bathroom, a bigger structure, whatever it is. But, still keeping an eye on what that wolf is doing, you can make your way to safety. And these are pulled from the CPW Wolf Resource Guide with their tips for how to handle interactions. In the even less likely event that the interaction escalates and the wolf doesn't leave the area, you want to stand your ground and look big. If you have a jacket, open it up so that your profile looks bigger. If you have buddies, you come in close to each other, so you look like a pretty formidable, like mega human, right? And you want to stand your ground, be assertive. Since they're pack animals, they understand that sort of, I'm alpha and I'm telling you what to do and I don't want you to mess with me. If you have bear spray, you feel free to use that at any point. If that wolf is within 30 feet, you can always use that bear spray. One of the really nice things about bear spray is you never have to hesitate to use it. If somebody startles you in the woods and you unload a can of bear spray on them, they're gonna have a bad day, but they're gonna be fine. It's not gonna be life-changing, and it serves them right for startling you. So I carry bear spray anytime I'm hiking alone. It's good for bears, pumas, wolves, people, whatever it is. It can turn a moose if you have an interaction with a moose. It's a really wonderful tool to have in your arsenal. And your radius of destruction is really big. And so you don't have to be a good shot. You can be pretty nervous. And it creates a cloud of really nasty spray. Has anybody here used bear spray? Yeah. Has anybody here been sprayed with that?
I just a tiny bit by mistake.
There's an awful big overlap between the people who have used bear spray and people who've been sprayed. That's not a common interaction, when I talk to people about this stuff. Yeah, and you're not dead.
No, I'm not dead. It was
Yeah.
pretty uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable, but I sprayed myself with it. It's not great, but it's a tool, unlike a gun, where you have to have good aim and you have to make sure you know what you're spraying, you know what you're shooting. You have to identify your target. Bear spray is a wonderful tool. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Off subject, but you mentioned it. You reckon it'll turn moose?
So when I worked on a different crew in Yellowstone, the only thing that we deployed bear spray on was a very interested moose, and it turned it. Yeah.
Was it just a curious moose or was it an aggressive moose?
It didn't back off. and it came in, the person who had to use the bear spray interpreted it as aggression. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. It's a really wonderful tool. People also recommend using air horns. When you have bear spray, probably use an air horn, but that can be a good tool too. If the wolf really in a really unlikely situation starts to approach more, be aggressive. You want to clap your hands, yell at it. If you have a stick, wave it around. This is really unlikely, but absolutely fight back. If that wolf makes physical contact, you want to fight back. Go for the eyes, go for the belly. You want to show that you are not going to be taken down easily. If you fall on the ground, you want to get back up as much as you can. All of this is really unlikely for you to ever have to use. Most wolf encounters are more like this. So this is a video from somebody from Oregon, and I think it's about 2 minutes. I'm going to play it for you. It's a wolf encounter. If I can play it for you. Oh, here we go.
While working as an ODFW summer intern, I had an exciting encounter with a wolf. I was alone surveying an area for signs of wolf activity when I saw a wolf walk out of the forest. As the wolf moved in my direction, it was clear that it didn't know that I was there. As it got closer, I said something quietly to alert the wolf. As soon as I did, the wolf stopped in its tracks, trying to figure out what made the noise. It turned and ran as soon as it realized I was there. Running away is a wolf's typical reaction to encountering a human. There are a few other behaviors I could have seen during this encounter. Sometimes wolves will bark howl when they feel nervous or threatened. They might also follow a person at a distance until they are out of the area that the wolves feel protective of, like a den or feeding site. These bolder behaviors become more likely if there is a dog present, since wolves see dogs as intruders in their territory. I can understand how someone might have felt threatened by this wolf. It's hard to imagine that a wolf could be so close without noticing me, since they have excellent senses of smell and sight. But the breeze was blowing toward me, carrying my scent away from the wolf. I was standing still with trees behind me and a small tree in front of me, and I was wearing green and brown clothing. So it makes sense that the wolf didn't notice me at first. If you encounter a wolf and it doesn't run away at first, it may be because the wolf doesn't know that you're there. A shout and an arm wave can let the wolf know. Be ready to encounter all kinds of wildlife on Oregon's wild lands.
And this is my experience as well. I've worked in wolf country for a lot of years, and I have encountered wolves. I've also done the things that you're not supposed to do in carnivore country. Part of my job has been to go into fresh kills and determine what caused them, or what killed those animals. I've also gone into mountain lion nurseries and pulled the kittens out, and wolf dens and pulled the pups out. And this kind of interaction is what I've always experienced. I have been barked at by a wolf, but it kept its distance and kind of patrolled on the periphery and watched me as I was pulling the pups out of the den and weighing them and whatnot. And the same thing with a mountain lion. The mom was there and we pulled the kittens out of the nursery, and she was definitely watching what we were doing, but I've never had an aggressive encounter with a carnivore. I have with elk, but that's a whole different thing. Okay, so that's human wolf interactions, and some, dog wolf interactions. Now, one question I thought folks might have is, what impacts might they have on big game? So scientific studies indicate that wolves can decrease local game populations. In general, across the landscape, they don't tend to have huge impacts on their prey, but locally they can have significant impacts. And we can look to other states to see how these dynamics generally play out. So Colorado's really lucky. We can benefit from the experience in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, New Mexico. to see how wolves back on the landscape plays out with a bunch of in a bunch of different dynamics in a bunch of different ways. So each of those states have different size wolf populations, and they still have thriving big game hunting opportunities and big game populations. So if we zoom in on Montana and look at those numbers, elk harvest in Montana has stayed pretty level for the last, 20 years. And that's in spite of wolf numbers increasing dramatically over that same time frame. And what I want to point out here is making sure that you note the axes, right? So we've got elk harvest on this axis, and you'll notice that it's a very different scale from the wolf population, which is showing up as very crooked on a PC here. So the wolf numbers and the elk numbers are not at the same scale. There are not more wolves than there were elk harvested. We had to graph them on two different axes because you'll notice those wolf numbers are much, much smaller than the elk numbers. And if you graph them on the same axes, you wouldn't be able to see the wolf numbers at all. But the point here, the take home, is that despite vastly growing wolf numbers, elk harvest remained level. Now, that's across the state of Montana. Certainly in local places, prey can be strongly influenced by wolf numbers. They can also, having wolves back on the landscape can also dramatically change prey behavior and change how people can hunt them. So if elk are more skittish because there are wolves back on the landscape, it can make it harder to get close enough to be able to hunt the way people would have before. All right, now switching focus to impacts on livestock, there's a similar story here. So the livestock producers in Montana and Wyoming, most of them are still there. We just did a neat event where we took ranchers from Colorado and brought them to Montana to meet with folks that have been dealing with wolf predation for the last 25, 30 years now. So that they could share tips and pointers about how to survive with wolves on the landscape. And what they told us was that nobody in their area had stopped running livestock because of the wolves. Everybody was able to do pretty well. What they said was it was actually the grizzlies that were really a problem for them, but they've been figuring out how to deal with wolves. Now, looking across the state, across wolf habitat, generally the losses are relatively manageable. And so to contextualize wolf losses in the grand scheme of other things that kill livestock, wolves are here. There's a lot of things that kill livestock that on average, when you're looking across the state, have a much bigger impact than wolf predation. So for Montana, wolf predation counted for just over 1% of unwanted losses and 0.02% of total inventory and less than 1% of annual gross income. Now that's across the state. In certain places, the losses can be devastating. That's absolutely true. That some producers work in places where the hunting habitat is really favorable to wolves, and or there's a lot of wolves that call that area home, and so those producers do not follow the pattern of what's going on across the state, and the losses are significant and can pose a real economic hardship. In addition to killing and injuring livestock, wolves and carnivores in general can have other indirect effects like decreases in pregnancy rates and increases in stress, which can erode ranchers' bottom lines by having cattle fail to gain adequate weight. So, and to make it very clear, you know, the numbers are encouraging for in general, but depending on the particulars of the situation, it can be really problematic. So for Colorado, the CPW has worked really hard to figure out how to supply ranchers with different livestock protection tools, compensation programs, technical expertise to help support as wolves come back, to make sure that ranchers can weather that. And in Colorado, we have a whole host of other organizations that are working hard to figure out how to support range riding and flagery and fox lights and whatever other tools are appealing to ranchers and get them to people who want them. All right, and I brought some documents about some of the Wildlife Services program and the CPW program. And I'm always happy to talk to people, to try and link people into resources to support folks with pets, folks with livestock, whatever it is that I can do. And with that, I will take any questions you may have. Or are we gonna switch over and do questions after?
Yeah, I guess maybe Tim, why don't you
Okay.
do your thing? Can you talk real quick to me though, while Tim's transitioning about like and when would livestock producers need to use those tools? Like it's not a preventative thing, it's after they see.
Oh, yeah. So I would recommend it as a preventative thing. So depending on the tool, right? So different tools have different strengths, are effective for different lengths of time in different contexts. And if there are wolves in the area, it's great to use preventative tools before an incident has happened. If wolves aren't anywhere nearby, if there's, they're not in the county, they're not in the watershed or whatever, then it's probably not worthwhile to take the time and the resources that it would take to use preventative tools. But it would be great to have them there if wolves are kind of making their way back. Now, that being said, ranchers' profit margins are so thin that, depending on the rancher, that adding another tool, another burden on top of everything else that has to happen with managing livestock, sometimes it'll have to wait until you've had an incident and then you have to figure out how to deal with it. That's a good question. Are you giving a?
Nope, I'm just gonna talk.
Okay.
Okay. So as before, I'm Tim Woodward. I'm game warden with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So what I'm gonna talk to you guys about tonight is where we've been in the process and where we're going. So, as you know, wolves were removed from the state in the early 1940s. And, since then, we've had a few visitors, but we really haven't had any wolves in the state. And in 2020, the voters of the state of Colorado passed a law that said we would reintroduce wolves in the state of Colorado. So CPW was mandated to do that. We were mandated to have wolves on the ground by the end of 2023. So they started a process. They got two working groups together. A technical working group, which was basically a group of people that had knowledge and experience with dealing with wolves and wolf reintroduction. And then they had a stakeholders group that they used that had people that were interested parties that were interested in livestock side, the reintroduction side, so we had both sides, pro and non-pro people so we could get a rounded picture of what needed to happen. Those groups gave their recommendations to CPW and we moved forward. In December, we went and trapped wolves in Oregon. They captured 10 and the first wolves were released in Grand County on December 18th, 2023. Sorry, trying to think. So there are 10 wolves in the state right now. Well, there are actually more than that. There were 10 reintroduced. Each one of those wolves has a collar on it, so they are collared. There are 2 wolves that came into the state on their own that were up in Jackson County. They're also collared. So the 12 wolves that we have in the state of Colorado right now all have collars on. Over the next 3 to 5 years, we are mandated to introduce 30 to 50 wolves in the state of Colorado. Every wolf that is introduced will have a collar put on it. However, as we go through the years, maybe as soon as next year, we can have litters of pups on the ground. Those will not be collared. So we won't know, as we get into this, we won't know what the exact number of wolves that we have in the state are. Yes, sir.
Will there be an effort to collar those?
No, it is not possible. So I will give you an example. When Montana reintroduced wolves, one of their statutory requirements was to have at least one collar in every pack. They can't even come close to doing that. So I just think it's impossible for us, money-wise and just trying to catch them, to do that. So we will have, wolves with collars, but we're gonna start getting a lot more that don't. What they wanna reach is they wanna reach a population of at least 200 wolves to make it successful by the plan. Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that one of the wolves collars stopped working?
Not that I'm aware of. I will tell you that, I mean, they're electronic. You know, I've actually helped with an elk study, actually in unit 38. And we do have collar failure on some of our studies. I couldn't tell you if one of the wolf collars has failed yet. But there is a time where they will stop working. And part of it is tied to battery life. So right now, we get a ping off of that collar every 4 hours. Every 16 hours, those 4 pings are uploaded to a satellite. Then they're downloaded by our biologists. So when we get data of where the wolves have been, it's old data. I mean, it's hours old, but it's old data. So I can't tell you that there's a wolf at this location right now. Okay, so battery life is dependent upon how many readings we get each day. So at some point in time, they usually last 2 to 3 years, but at some point in time, those batteries and those collars will fail. So, and I don't know if anybody has seen the watershed maps that we put out on our website. So I printed a couple off. So these are the first. I'll give you one of those. These are the first 2 months of release. And what that shows is that shows where those wolves are in the watershed. So it highlights the whole watershed. They may have only been in a portion of that watershed in that last 30 days. But they highlight the whole watershed. So, a couple things for pet owners and livestock owners. Okay. I want to remind you that wolves are still on the endangered species list. They're still regulated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The state did get what we call a 10J ruling from the federal government. What that basically says is the wolves that we were introducing in Colorado are experimental and are not part of the population to keep the wolves viable in the United States. What that does is that gives the agency and livestock producers a little bit more leeway to do stuff. So if we weren't able to get that, livestock producers could not legally haze wolves. Okay, you can't do much with a wolf, but since we were able to get that 10J exemption, we have non-lethal hazing methods that they can use. They can also do lethal hazing or lethal, but there's a very restricted circumstance where they can do that. And the only way that they can do that for their livestock is if it's actively attacking their livestock. So what that means is there have to be actually teeth marks, it's trying to attack and kill that livestock. That is the only time that they're allowed to do that. So if it's walking through their pasture or walking through their cattle, they can't do anything. Okay? we have two separate game damage now. We have game damage for mountain lions and bears. We have game damage for wolves. And what I would recommend to people that are concerned with that is if they think they have wolf activity or any kind of sign, call me or call CPW immediately. Because then we can start working with them. We have methods and things that we can do to help out livestock producers. But we need to know about it. So, pet owners. What do you think you can do if a wolf is attacking your pet? Any ideas?
It's different for the wild, livestock is my understanding.
It is.
And
you-
the best thing you can do is get your pet away from it.
You can do nothing to harm that wolf if it's attacking your pet or kills your pet. I don't make the rules. I just get to tell you what they are. So, I would highly recommend that you keep track of your pets. Yes, sir.
Not that I disagree with what you said, but, is that not true also for mountain lions?
That is correct.
And yet people kill mountain lions to protect their pets.
Yes,
aren't
and
prosecuted,
what's that?
and are not prosecuted.
What I will tell you is it depends on the circumstance.
We had an
Because-
incident here in Hilton County.
Yes,
Recently.
I am very aware of that. And there are other extenuating circumstances where that gentleman was not charged. So, but what I will tell you is, generally, you can't kill a mountain lion or bear for attacking your pet. The difference with wolves are, they're federally listed. So it won't be, well, it will be me knocking on your door, but I'll have a federal agent standing beside me when we do so.
It ain't gonna be my door.
So, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, I'm just trying to explain the facts. So, you know, wolves are a different beast, right? And, you know, regardless of your feeling, you know, against, for, they're here, and we need to learn how to live with them. So, but they are still federally protected. Trying to think, what else can I, yes, ma'am.
Tim, we have an online question and it was, do you have any data or statistics on how many wolves are in like rescues or wildlife centers? And is there any plan for those wolves to be introduced into the wild?
So the only wolves that people have in rescue centers and I'll caveat that. Most of the wolves that are in, you know, wolf sanctuaries and things like that are actually wolf hybrids. They're not pure wolves. Because they're federally endangered and listed. And there are certain qualifications that you have to be able to possess those. I'm not saying that there aren't facilities that have wolves, but 99% of the facilities that people talk about are wolf hybrids.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Relating to the wolf hybrids.
Yes,
I know there are some in, say, Gilpin County.
yes.
Has there been a study on the interaction between those hybrids and real wolves? I mean, you know, pure
Not-
wolves?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm learning about wolves like the rest of the,
And have you
the
heard
folks.
any?
Yeah, what kind of
Well,
study are you?
Well, I'm thinking, okay, there's wolves near me, I hear them, or hybrids.
Mhm.
And, I think they're making noise when they get fed and they're in a fenced area. I mean, I could see them get out
Mhm.
and I wondered if there was a study where the pure wolves kill the hybrids or if they join.
Yeah, so it's not something that's been studied, but I would imagine that it would be treated like intruding wolves. And
Mhm.
so, wolves have a sort of vision fusion social structure where you can have wolves from one pack disperse into and join another pack, or you can have the other pack see them as competitors and intruders and fight until somebody gets injured or gets killed.
Uh-huh.
For a wolf hybrid, I mean, it could go either way, but I would think the most likely outcome would be either
quick questions, I'll ask my first one. You showed, elk as something they ate, and is that their prime food?
It is.
So the moose that were introduced, and there's many here that just came over the divide, that won't make, wolves come this way, do you think?
Deer, elk and moose.
They eat everything.
Yes.
Are there any thoughts on what we're gonna see happen with the moose? Like, maybe they're gonna go stay off in the woods a little bit more rather than show up on the front porch?
So moose is an interesting subject because, you know, they are still specialty species in the state. You know, we give out a limited number of licenses. We actually give out a fair number in Gilpin County and started giving out licenses east of 119 to try to increase, you know, people that have the ability to draw a license and have the access to property to thin some of those, what I call subdivision moose. You know, moose is the one animal in this state that I'm actually somewhat afraid of.
Yeah.
You know, and
Someone,
so,
they're in my yard.
yep, so, you know, they're hard to get away. They do not respond well to certain types of hazing. It just makes them mad.
That was my question about the bear spray. I never heard back.
And for me, what really works well is a taser. We actually do use taser probably more on wildlife than we do on people. Actually, I've never used it on people. Numerous times on wildlife, especially bears. Works well, but moose don't like it either. But there are things that a moose makes them mad and they'll charge you for trying it, so.
They electric fence, we've seen a big bull moose back away and.
Yep, yeah.
And that seemed to work.
Electricity is a great thing, especially for wildlife. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's probably one of the only things that'll keep a bear out of chicken coops and stuff like that. So, yes, ma'am.
I have two more questions from
Okay.
online. What does CPW consider a viable population for wolves in Colorado and for Ronald Fullerton?
So right now, what I've heard and we've been told is 200.
Okay.
So once that population reaches 200, they'll consider the reintroduction a success.
The other question is, during the Yellowstone wolf reintroduction, the rivers changed shape and the water tables changed. Is this predicted to happen in Colorado as well?
So one of the things that they have in Yellowstone that they don't have in Yellowstone, I guess, that they have here, there is no hunting in Yellowstone. So we may get some, and what it basically does is it causes ungulates on the landscape to use the land differently. And so it may have a little bit of that impact, but Yellowstone is kind of a different species because there is no hunting on that landscape. It may happen, it may not. You know, there are different variables for each location.
I've noticed just from visiting Yellowstone before the wolf introduction and after, there was a substantial decrease in the amount.
Yeah,
We observed that the bison, which are now a problem there, don't react to this at all. But we were watching wolves walking by bison, but the second a grizzly bear showed up, it was like the bison took off and ran. They just scattered and ran like crazy when a grizzly bear showed up.
yeah.
Like they have no reaction to it. And so there's been a lot more bison up there than there are elk. And I am concerned a little about what's gonna happen to the elk in Rocky Mountain.
Yeah,
Can I
well,
piggyback on
yeah,
you?
go right ahead.
So the
Because you
Yellowstone,
probably have a lot more experience than I do.
the Yellowstone examples, with the rivers changing shape is a little bit, it's more complicated. There's a video that's out. that's like, it's a British narrator and it talks about the deer and the rivers changing shape. Has anybody seen that? It says deer, but they're showing elk. So it's a little bit more of a complicated situation. So, in Yellowstone, wolves were eradicated and the elk population got super abundant. And it got actually far above what the carrying capacity of the land could sustain.
In the trees.
Right, and so they were browsing down the aspens and the cottonwoods, and on the riparian plants. And so if you look at pictures of Yellowstone before wolves were introduced in the same spot, and after 30 years after wolves were introduced, the vegetation looks entirely different. And when the vegetation is different, the stream bank stabilization is different, and so the streams became more channelized. And these have all sorts of cascading effects on the different species that live in that system. So wolves were reintroduced in 1995 and 1996, and since then, there have been a few things that have happened with the elk population. So one part is that wolves started hunting elk, and they did lower the number of elk in the park. In addition, hunting restrictions for elk, hunting tags were bumped up outside the park. And so there was a lot more hunter harvest. Also, there were two very harsh winters that influenced elk numbers. So it was a combination of human factors, a false baseline of what Yellowstone elk numbers should look like from an ecological standpoint, and wolves being reintroduced, that all changed the elk population dynamics. And so, and one thing I mentioned in the talk is that the population numbers can change, those can go down, and their behavior can change dramatically. And so what they saw with elk in Yellowstone was that before wolves were introduced, the life history of an elk was that it was born, it would eat until its teeth wore out, and at about the age of 16, and then it would starve to death and die. Once wolves were brought back on the landscape, they couldn't just hang out in the riparian areas and eat the best vegetation. They had to move a lot more to avoid wolf predation. And so that changed the plant community response, especially along the riparian areas, which is why we saw the plants return, the path of the river change, the shape of the river change, the plant community changed. And wolf predation took out more of those senescent, the older elk. So they didn't live as long. They weren't living until their teeth wore out and died. Wolves, because of the way they hunt, because they're coursing predators, they chase down their prey. They tend to take the infirmed, the weak, the sick, the older, and very young members of the population. Now we can contrast that with mountain lions that are ambush predators, right? So their version of predation is to stalk up really close, jump on something and eat it. And so they're not as selective. So they don't take the senescent, the weak members of the population. They take just whoever they can get their hands on. So those carnivores have very different influences on the predator-prey dynamics and the community ecology.
I have a question about wolves versus coyotes. So I know I've heard and tonight as well that wolves are very skittish and will run away. Not my experience with coyotes, and I'm just wondering, what is that, just a natural difference? Is it that coyotes are used to us and so they're not as cautious?
Yeah, so carnivores, I think of carnivores as being on a spectrum of their propensity to habituate to people. And that depends on their evolution and their ecology in the system. And coyotes and black bears anchor one end of the spectrum. I think coyotes probably really anchor, and then bears are a close second. And then pumas are on the other end, right? There's nowhere you can go in the US where you can see pumas. But you can go to a national park, you can go to Yellowstone, you can see wolves, you can see grizzlies, black bears, coyotes, but you're still not going to see pumas, right? Their evolution is different and hardwires them when they're solitary. Wolves are in between. So they're canids, like coyotes, and they're social, but I don't know if it's their history with people, with all the hunting, with how much we've decreased their numbers, and so we've selected the bolder members out of the population, or if it's that coyotes, because they're a subordinate predator, they have to be a bit more wily and learn to operate in those smaller niches and the kind of scraps of habitat. And so they're just maybe evolutionarily better equipped to be around people. That would be my guess, but yeah, what you're saying is absolutely true that.
And piggybacking onto that, coyotes are very adaptive. And the other thing is, people feed coyotes. And once you feed a coyote, they associate people with food. And so that natural fear that they have of people goes away. And they adapt. I mean, coyotes are probably one of the most widespread species, and, they have them in Manhattan, LA. They're just adaptive. I mean, they're like the cockroach. If there's nuclear war, it's gonna be coyotes and cockroaches as well. So, and that's one of the big things that we talk about not feeding wildlife is because they lose that natural fear of humans. And there's no way to break that pattern. We see that with bears a lot. Bears get into a house, get rewarded. They're gonna continue to do that. And then I have to show up and be the bad guy, whichever. So, one last thing on wolves. You may or may not read in the news today. We had 4 depredations in Grand County. Wolves eat. Okay, it's inevitable that they're going to depredate on livestock. It wasn't a matter of if they do, when. I wish it wouldn't have been this soon, but it's calving season. And, we're gonna take care of that rancher. Cause that's what we're trying to do is take care of livestock producers. But depredation is gonna happen. So, it's part of having wolves.
Tim, for the livestock producers, can you talk about, how you're gonna be taking care of the livestock producers?
So what I will tell you is I could go into, we have a huge policy of how we're gonna do this. It would take me another hour to explain everything to you guys, and half you would be asleep. Just being honest. And 5 minutes after you walk out the door, you will forget. So what I will tell you, and what I told you in the beginning is, if you think you have wolves in the area, let us know, because we'll work hard to confirm or deny. The other thing is, if you have game damage caused by a wolf or mountain lion or bear, get a hold of us immediately. Okay, we have an officer on call 24/7. Granted, my area, so the district I cover, what I cover myself, I cover Northwest Jefferson County and all of Gilpin County. The area that I am in goes from Gilpin County, Clear Creek County, Park County, and most of Jefferson County. There's 8 of us for that whole landmass. So if you call, because we dispatch through Colorado State Patrol, so if you call them, you're gonna probably talk to the on-call wildlife officer. He could be in Lake George. That's a 3-hour trip. He will come, but just understand it's gonna be a 3-hour trip. If there's an officer that's closer, they may show up. But the best thing you can do as a livestock producer, or even if you have, hobby livestock, goat, sheep, what have you, call us. Okay, because as soon as you can get a hold of us and we can start communicating, the better off everybody will be. So, one last thing I'll tell you is, if for some reason coyote hunting is legal in the state of Colorado, correct? Yes, people can hunt coyotes. If for some reason you are a coyote hunter and for some reason you shoot something that looks like a coyote that may not be a coyote, call us immediately, okay? But if you're out coyote hunting, I would really make sure you are good on your ID.
Sir, I have one question
Yes, sir.
that nobody's covered this in your entire presentation.
Yep.
And that's subspecies of wolves.
You okay?
And I mean, the wolves that were originally in Colorado, almost all of them are extinct now. there's been studies done, from what I understand, about, what they've taken from the wolves that they did have here. And they've done DNA on it and compared it to the wolves that are up in the, Michigan, area, along with, Wisconsin, and also the Hudson Bay area, and they found out that they're very similar. The wolves that you reintroduced, what subspecies are they? It's important because it's important because the wolves came from Asia, okay? And they didn't all come at the same time.
Yeah.
There were wolves that came and filtered down all the way into New Mexico and into Texas. And then after that, more wolves came over the landmass between Alaska and stuff, and Asia. And they were bigger and they were stronger wolves, and they drove the other ones further south. And you're talking about a difference of these animals being 50 pounds to 135, 140 pounds. And that makes a whole lot of difference on the way these animals are gonna behave. Plus, I think they got an attitude the last ones.
Well, and, you know, I honestly can't tell you what subspecies they are. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
can't.
don't want to more,
Yeah.
money more than quarterback.
Yeah. And maybe you can,
I can't,
but-
I don't know, I
well,
was hoping to find out.
so, you know, I know we have the Mexican wolves, which is a different subspecies.
Yeah, that'd be a perfect species to call it.
But they were actually never in Colorado.
Well,
So
they were very close.
they were
to what
close,
was-
but they were,
The
yeah,
animals that were here were the nubulus and the youngie, okay? And they were discovered originally by the Long's expedition. And they even, the people they gave them their names, as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, and stuff. And they are not huge animals. They were 60, 75 pound animals that they were called lopers. And they went and they followed in the buffalo, and when there was a sick or dying buffalo, they ate it.
yeah.
And the ones that were up in the mountains were a little bit bigger. They were called the youngest. But I mean, if you might be a bit introduced to subspecies that's never been in Colorado to start with.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I think that's probably the case. I mean, so when the reintroduction came up, you know, they knew that the Mexican wolves had never been in Colorado. So they didn't go for that. And then the working groups didn't want to go into Canada, because the Canadian wolves are a lot bigger. And so they selected the 4 western states for which to try to take.
At least what I've heard, the wolves in Yellowstone are being classified as Mackenzie Valley wolves. That lived in the area that they came from British Columbia. That's what was introduced into Yellowstone into Montana. And they've built these animals very well. They very well could have traveled into Oregon.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, part of the history is, you know, this vote was passed by the people, and it was mandated by the people of the state of Colorado.
Yeah,
For our agency to do.
and it said Western Slope.
Yes, yes, it did. And the issue is out of all the western states that they elected to get wolves from, there was only one state that agreed to let the
Yeah,
agency do that.
they didn't want them in Oregon.
So, you know, there isn't a huge selection of being able to pick and choose from wolves. to try to fulfill a mandate that was passed by the people.
Did anybody consider the Hudson Bay area and stuff?
Yeah. I don't know, I wasn't on either of those working groups, I don't know if that was discussed, I just know what came from it. And what came from it was that they were gonna pull those from the western states.
Okay, you guys, I'm sorry, but we probably should cut the conversation just
Yeah.
because of time. So I want to thank our speakers for coming tonight. If anyone here or online has any further questions that we didn't get to answer, or if you guys want to continue your discussion about the wolf species, feel free to email me and I can get the answer, or how can people get in touch with you, Tim?
I can give you my email address. You wanna write it down, it's Tim.Woodward, it's WOODWARD, @state.co.us.
Okay, cool. And for folks online, we'll send up a follow-up email probably early next week with the evaluation and some resources that we have here in the room but aren't online for you.
And, sorry,
no.
if folks have questions, I'm gonna hang up for a few minutes afterwards, so.
Okay, cool. And I just want to remind everyone in the room to fill out the evaluations. We have some pens here if you need them.
No, I didn't get evaluation.
Okay, and yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Let's continue this conversation on our evaluation. If you want to hear more, learn more, please put it on here so we know what further workshops we can present on this topic. All right, thanks everyone online. Have a good night.